I'll explain. Welcome, everybody, for the Wednesday, October 17th work session. The mayor will be about 15 minutes late. He will be here, though, so I've been delegated to start the meeting as council president. Topic under discussion today is homelessness and Opportunity Eugene. I've got a couple of motions I want to make. I actually have three. But first of all, I'll let the city manager introduce the topic of the session and where we might head with it. City manager.
Thank you, Council President. And I'm going to turn this over to Sarah and Michael. Our intent today is to give a short presentation. We have a couple of recommended motions that we've sent out and/or
we're going to pass out right now.
Pass them out, and then of course we're open for question and answer. I think one of the things that we're, and it's a little bit, I think from our perspective, we're hoping to get some additional direction from council today, policy direction on where you want us to spend our effort and how you want us to proceed from here. And so that will be helpful. The more direction that you're able to give us, it will just help us as we move through this conversation. So as we go, keep that in mind. So, Sarah?
In that regard, I'd like to make my first motion right now. We can table it. We can agree to table it after the presentation because some of the facts may come out during the presentation that we might want to amend the motion, but this will do exactly what you just said. It will provide some direction. So I think I'll go ahead and make my motion. Motion number one is I move to direct the city manager to return on October 31st with a list of potential sites that could be leased to a nonprofit to establish a pilot project for temporary transitional housing shelters for approximately 30 adults and their accompanying children. The list should include city-controlled properties that are 1 acre or larger. The list should also, A, indicate if there are buildings on site that could be utilized, B, indicate access to public transportation and bike paths, C, indicate whether the site has utilities or not, and D, include properties that are underutilized and not routinely used for community events. And if I can get a second, I'll speak to it just briefly. Thank you. Well, this kind of we kind of touched on this during our last meeting a couple weeks ago, but we got to it so late in the work session that we were never able to really frame this as information that we thought would be useful to the council. But this motion does not say let's immediately create a pilot project of temporary transitional housing. It says we need more information. The more information we get, this will help us frame our decision. This is not approving or disapproving of temporary homeless shelters, transitional shelters. It just says this. We need this information so that will help us guide our ultimate decision, whether we accept the idea or reject the idea. So now I just suggested we could table this and then come back to it later. But I want to get this out there before we leave today, so people can think about it. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate very much your effort to try and put some work together here for us to move in a direction that will help. For me, we've got the cart before the horse a little bit. I'm in need of certainly hearing what staff has to say first and understanding better the sense of why they want to go in the direction that they're going before voting on this. I also, with regard to one site that would be city-sponsored, there are some issues around risk and liability that I want to make sure that I understand real well before we move forward with choosing which site. And so I'll move to table at this time until we hear their presentation at least.
Second.
Now, okay, so I guess that we have to approve that, right, a majority? All right, those in favor? Those opposed? Opposed. Okay, Councilor Clark's motion passes. Is the city attorney here? Oh, yes, of course you are, right in front of me. Sorry, Glenn. Is it kosher to make a second motion that could also be tabled?
Yes.
Okay.
With the motion, prior motion being tabled, there is nothing on the
The slate.
floor, so either it can be another motion, it can be the manager's presentation.
Okay, the slate is clean then. Well, I'd like to make the second motion that I sent out to everybody yesterday, and that can also be tabled, until after staff's presentation and discussion, and then either one of the motions could be modified or totally rejected or whatever. But I'd like to get it out there. There again, I just don't want this work session to come down to the last 5 minutes and then be scrambling to present possible direction to staff and the manager. So I'll just go right ahead and make my second motion now. I move to direct the city manager to return on October 31st with an explanation of the legal requirements for establishing a pilot program for unhoused families with children as referenced in motion number 1. The information should address state and local ordinances, codes, zoning laws, and all other legal requirements. And I'll speak to it. Thank you. It's pretty self-explanatory, so I won't just talk about this one until later. Councilor Clark.
Move to amend to add the language and potential risks.
That doesn't,
We're asking
risk is not a, yes, okay, I can accept that.
friendly minute.
Is the person who seconded the motion?
Where the motion accepts it, I will.
Okay, I'll accept it too. So the motion has been amended. I haven't heard if anyone wants to table it or discuss it right now. Councilor Ortiz.
This motion,
Until after the discussion.
till after the discussion.
All right.
I'll second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to table this motion also. All those in favor, and please indicate. 7-0. That motion to table. Oh, 8. Oh, sorry. They don't have eyes in the back of my head. All right, so that motion is also tabled. Okay.
Because you only have one kid, George.
Yeah. Maybe that's why. Okay, so those two motions being made and tabled, I guess we're ready for staff's presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and I'll turn over to Michael to make a presentation, and he also passed out 3 motions that, from our perspective, we would also ask you to consider as part of your work session today.
Oh.
And those are different than what is in your AIS.
Good afternoon, Council. As mentioned today, I'd like to continue our discussions and ask for more guidance. Also introduce a proposed staff work program for the issues we've been working through together. To frame this, I would like to bring back discussions on the policy framework, the staff work program I just mentioned, and then our recommendations related to that. So following our July work session, staff was advised to work on finalizing the policy framework that will be used to evaluate the recommendations of the Opportunity Eugene Task Force. This framework has been presented in the past, and staff have reviewed it and brought it back for adjustments. The policy framework includes the following. Actions should work to assist individuals and families in permanently breaking the cycle of homelessness. Actions should promote the principles of health, safety, and security both for the unhoused and housed residents of the City of Eugene. Actions should involve the development of partnerships and the sharing of responsibilities and resources with other agencies and stakeholders. Actions should be built on efforts to garner community support, be accessible to its beneficiaries, and balance issues related to appropriate siting. Action should promote the city's triple bottom line framework and promote environmental equity and fiscal sustainability. Action should define goals and be able to report on progress made toward reaching these goals. And new projects should begin as pilots in their initial phases with the possibility for growth as success and demand is demonstrated. A policy framework is important for this work because it lays the foundation for future actions and sets objective criteria for evaluating future policy and initiatives. Upon completing this, staff will be able to evaluate the recommendations of the Opportunity Eugene Task Force and return to council with staff recommendations based on utilizing this framework. We would like to take a moment and pause our presentation here to get a sense from council if this framework represents the general direction of the council going forward. In the past, we haven't had much discussion about the framework, and we kind of wanted to open that up now to field any questions or any suggestions related to this.
Councilor Farr.
Just one question on number 5, Michael. You said promote triple bottom line. You on the list sustainability?
I'm sorry?
On number 5, you said promote triple bottom line. You only list sustainability on the actual visual presentation here.
Oh, that is, yeah, I have a little breakout below. It's promote the triple bottom line and by promoting environmental
For the record,
equity.
5 is promote the triple bottom line.
Right. That's how I define sustainability, as the triple bottom line, yes.
They're synonymous.
Councilor Ortiz.
Thank you, George. So, for me personally, this looks like what the parameters of any work that we do should be. It's my understanding and interpretation of this. Is that correct?
To a degree, it creates just a way to kind of balance, looking at the recommendations. It creates an objective set of criteria. So it frames the recommendation in the sense that if council were to support this, we can come back and talk about how recommendation 2 does transition people away or does not, and creates a
So
rubric.
do you want us to go down the list and say yes, no, yes, no?
If council feels that's appropriate.
I mean,
I'll just suggest also, just eventually our third motion would actually put them all together if they're all fine, or if there's any changes that you'd want to make on the framework itself. And so
okay.
that would be one way to actually not codify it, but to actually have the council make a decision that this is the framework, and which we will then use to evaluate programs as we move into the future.
So thank you, City Manager, for that. So I am okay with all but 6, because doing this kind of work out in the community, as a community health outreach worker, when my other job, you can't really measure success when you're dealing with a certain population, and I think that this is one of the issues with that. Because if you're looking at measurable outcomes, how are you going to measure, okay, we got this lady with her 4 kids off the street, but here comes another family. So I think the numbers will, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but when you think about it, if you're looking at numbers and measuring, I don't think that fits. That's my personal opinion.
Mike.
Thank you, sir. I'm kind of tempted to just throw this motion out there as the way by which we would either amend or accept this. And is that what you're looking for as a...
Yes, we're looking for a motion that says, here's the framework, and it could be these 7, it could be 6 of them, it could be none of them, or a completely new set of them.
I have an addition to one of them that I'd like to make, but I guess just as a way of getting us through this so we can have a fuller discussion, I'll go ahead and move number 3, that council approve the policy framework for the city to use in evaluating and proposing possible options for addressing homeless issues. And if I have a second, I'll speak to it and then make an amendment.
I'll second the motion.
I think this is a good idea. I think several of us may have, as Andrea just did, ideas on how to refine this and make it closer to our sentiment. I would move to amend number 4 to say promote and protect neighborhood livability.
I'll second that. All right, it's been moved and seconded to amend number 4. All those in favor?
Well,
Any discussion first?
what does that mean?
This is grand policy language for them to be able to come back to us with the specifics. So what it means is really up to them. But from my perspective, adding promote and protect adds to the idea that when we're doing this work, there were a lot of folks that had concerns around neighborhood livability as an issue with regard to placement. So for me, to promote neighborhood livability is one thing, but to protect it is to address the concerns of those that would have concerns about their livability in their neighborhood.
This kind of brings me to my general point about this. So these could mean anything, a lot of different things to all of us, as they're not clearly defined. You know, like Andrew's issue with measurable outcomes, I agree and disagree at the same time. And as well, a lot of these policy framework things are going to come in conflict. So if they're absolute policy frameworks, you could potentially set up a circumstance where there is no place where we would be able to place one of these sites that would promote neighborhood livability and protect neighborhood livability because someone objected to it. So I guess I think we should have a broader discussion about what does this mean for us in terms of how we're going to use it. If it's a filter and we have to check off on each one of these things as we move forward, it doesn't work for me. Because so I'm wondering how we're going to use these and what's the definition of each one.
Okay.
Um,
John had a response, I
I
think.
could talk a
Yes.
little bit about the intent. You know, I think of this a little bit like our triple bottom line framework that we use on a variety of things, that it's one way to take a look at a particular policy or program or strategy or project that says, how well does it balance all of these? How well does it meet some of those criteria? And so it's same with TBL. You don't come down to the end and come up with a number, and therefore that number dictates your action. And so in my mind, what this does is it provides a similar kind of a framework that we evaluate various projects or initiatives or strategies. And so when something comes before you, one of the things that we're looking at is how well does that transition people away from homelessness? Really great or not so great? That doesn't dictate whether or not you're going to accept the project, but it's a way to talk about the projects in a consistent way, and you're evaluating them based on the kinds of things that you're trying to achieve. And then at the end of that, you take all of that and you make a decision, but it helps inform that conversation. Does that help a little? So that's our intent, that it's not a rigid, you check the box, and if you check a majority of boxes, it's a go, and if you don't, it's a no-go. It's a framework in which you can evaluate.
Okay.
So that would be our intent. Don't know if that's the council's intent.
If the council has that same intent, then I'm okay.
That was my intent in the motion.
Betty's next.
Thanks. I agree with Andrea about the measurable outcomes. Most things that are important can't be measured. So I have a problem with, I would substitute something like do a study, some kind of study to follow up. And I don't know right now how to say that, but I think it's important to track people and see if they've been helped. But when you talk about measurable, it's like the things you do when teaching. Most of the things you can't, the really important things you can't actually measure. And I don't know where we are as far as, are we going to vote on
My amendment is first
your amendment?
to the original motion.
Yeah, okay. But we're not voting yet, right?
Modify.
Chris is next.
Thank you. It's interesting to be where we're putting out the motions before we've had the conversation, so we have to keep tabling and modifying while we're having presentations. It's kind of interesting way of doing things. But what this points out to me is how much we don't know about what we're trying to make decisions on. I mean, there is still a lot of unanswered questions. There's still a lot of conversation that needs to occur. I am absolutely aware of time constraints. I mean, cold weather is coming. I'm very clear on that. And there's a lot of things that need to get done. But if I was trying to build a house and somebody said, do you have the architectural plans? I said, no, I haven't got the plans yet, but I got to get this house built. Am I really going to get a good house built without plans? And I don't think we have, at least from our standpoint. I know other people have their plans, but we haven't really got our plans. And if we can't agree on the parameters, then we're not at the point where we need to start operating if we haven't agreed on some of the parameters yet. So I'm not saying I'm not supportive of everything we're talking about. I'm just, as I've said before, wanting to do it thoughtfully and deliberately and carefully. And from that standpoint, I do think, and I've been having a lot of conversations with folks, and there are some things we can put in place right away that can deal with some of the issues we have right now as we buy some time to be able to talk about this more thoughtfully. If we're feeling pressure to get something in place immediately to deal with cold weather, and we're trying to create this entire house because of that, I think we're creating a lot of risk. If we want to deal with the cold weather, I think there are ways we can do that. And then have the time to have the rest of this conversation the way it needs to occur. There's still a lot of people that need to be heard from. There's still a lot of additional information that needs to be provided that we do not have. We don't have it, and I'll tell you that flat out. We think we know what we're talking about, and we do not. And if we make a lot of decisions now with only half the information, I don't think we necessarily are going to make the best choice. I do think there's been an enormous amount of work that's gone into it on the part of the Opportunity folks. There's been a lot of work that's gone into it on the part of city folks. At this point, they're not necessarily in alignment, and that concerns me. If we don't have alignment, are we making all the right choices? So I think with that said, with the motion that's currently on the floor, the modification that's already been proposed as an amendment I'm okay with. Under number 6, if people are concerned about talking about measurable outcomes, then let's just report back. Turn number 6 into regular reports back on progress to the council. That works fine. But, you know, I want to get the parameters defined before we start leaping to the solutions. And to me, that's the logical way to do it.
Okay. Andrea's next.
Thank you, George. Chris, it's very seldom that I don't agree with what you're saying because I think you're really a certified smart person. But I think that we have heard from a lot of people, good and bad. I mean, there's people who have concerns negatively about what we're trying to do here. I think we have a whole community of people, some of which are in the audience, that have made this their life work and are here and willing to support something. And I think that I'll say this again, I think it's just the political will of this body that needs to happen in giving direction to the staff. I personally think that this motion that the manager put in, I have heartburn over 3 of the 4 that are put there, because I feel like, you know, Mike, with your motion about promote neighborhood safety and livability or whatever it was, you know, it's like that it just like this big flare just came up, you know. It's just like, really, you want to protect my neighborhood livability? Really? Really? I mean, have you been to my neighborhood?
As a matter of fact, I have.
You know, I mean, seriously, there's things that need to change in this community, and I think it needs to be a heavy lift on the community's end and on this council's end to move in a direction that really kind of addresses this. It has been continually addressed with city staff and county staff. I don't want to take anything away from all the work that the agencies have done. But I believe that with the Opportunity folks that have come to us, I think that they're helping us look at it through a different set of glasses. And all the information that's come to us about other villages and other parts of the country, they somehow figure out and manage how to do it, you know, and they haven't been sued. So I just would like to see us move into a direction where we are doing something this year because, you know, Chris, maybe they don't have blueprints, but a lean-to will do.
Okay, I'll put my myself in here. Yeah, I mean, the policy framework is fine, but we can already see that we're getting into the minutia of just the 7 main headings. Mike, I won't be able to support your amended, because it's kind of like, it's I see this as almost like a gopher hole. A good idea comes along, now there's 7 filters, let's look at it to death, let's look at it to death, let's shunt it off in this little hole over here instead of staying it to the main path. You know, this is like moving us away from the idea of the temporary homeless transitional housing idea, which is kind of like the main topic right now. Not that the even warming centers and all that. I mean, we need to talk about that too. How those are going to be funded, what's going to happen this winter, what's going to happen immediately. We're so far behind on this other idea, though, of getting information, and I'm not even sure if I will vote for this framework here, because I'll see it almost as peripheral to the main event, personally. I just see it as another way to talk something to death and not provide action. And I think that's what's been happening. I mean, 60 people met last winter for 3 months, over 3 months really, and a group of us counselors and staffers met for 2 or 3 months before that, and we've been talking, and nothing's happened. Really, literally, nothing has happened. And I just see this as kind of a, not with it's not, there's no ill intent. I'm not saying that at all. That there's no evil intent here about hinting that. But I just see it as this kind of another way to shunt it aside, delay a decision, delay getting information. So anyway, that's what I'm kind of thinking about this now. Mike.
George, I appreciate your point, and despite some flashes here, I understand what's being said. I just want to say I agree with Chris that it's better to do something well than do it fast, even though we are under some time pressure. And there's ample evidence that we do that all the time. And how many years now have we been trying to add to the UGB? 5? We've been going through the Envision Eugene process so we can add a little more land to the UGB. 5 years? I hope we're not going to do this for 5 years before we make a decision. But it's being thoughtful and intelligent about what could be a controversial subject and what does affect many people, and we want to do it intelligently. I appreciate what staff has put forward as I see as principles and guideposts about how to think about the work and the recommendations that they're making. I think that's a wise way to proceed. What they asked us to do was simply tweak it and make it ours so that they know they're doing, and what they put in front of us is the right thing that's consistent with other city policies and our thinking on how to address this problem. I added what I did with regard to the to that amendment in order to try to be consistent with other work that we do, because yes, promoting and protecting neighborhood livability across the city is important to me. Thank you.
I see no one else in the queue, so I suppose we should vote on Councilor Clark's amendment to the list here. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed? 4.
So I suppose that in the case of safety and livability, we've got safety up here in number 2, creating and promoting health, safety, and security throughout the community. So it seems redundant to put in 4. I will vote no on that.
Okay. So,
Move to table this conversation
Second.
until after the conversation.
Second.
Table this decision until after the conversation.
I'll second that.
Andrea seconded it.
Oh, okay. It's been moved and seconded to table this. vote, so we're tabling the
This
vote.
vote.
This vote.
No, no, on the main.
That was the amendment. The first motion was to accept.
All those in favor of tabling this motion? And
No.
opposed? 3. Motion passes to table it.
Okay, I'll take over from now, Judge. Committed it through this one.
Okay.
So we've tabled, as I understand it, we've tabled 3, please help me understand, are we doing 1 and 2 now, or what is it?
We actually have a
Presentation.
They haven't even done
That
the
is not.
We haven't had a presentation yet?
No.
starting in.
That's the nature of the table.
We tabled George's 2 motions, one with an amendment that passed.
I'll let, just a minute. Manager, will you, I'm sorry, I just,
Yeah, no, we haven't actually made the presentation yet. George presented 2 motions, those were tabled. This motion was put out, it's obviously been tabled, and so
we
We're
do
in the-
everything and we're ready to have the presentation.
that would be,
Okay.
Yes.
that'd be okay.
Long last.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll turn it over to Michael to.
To quickly refresh our memories, I'd like to walk through the recommendations of the Opportunity Eugene Task Force. These recommendations include the following. It was to create a commission to continue to explore homelessness solutions and serve as an ongoing voice to champion the progress that was made during the task force. To improve laws and ordinances that criminalize and block homeless individuals, and then review laws that inordinately affect homeless individuals in our community. One was continue and expand existing services to the homeless, with the idea that any new initiatives should not sacrifice resources to existing services. Improve traditional and non-traditional health care access. It was acknowledged that the combination of mental health issues, substance abuse, and chronic homelessness, and physical illness affect a disproportionate number of homeless individuals. Create and support day-use community centers. It was acknowledged that there is an ever-growing need for day-use style community centers in our community. And finally was identify and establish potential sites, which we'll be talking about today. So following our July 18th work session, after the framework discussion, staff were asked to identify and evaluate potential public and private sites and identify process options to establish one or more of these sites. In our last meeting about 3 weeks ago, staff discussed our efforts following the work session, which include a preliminary analysis that led to hundreds of potential sites. Staff have continued to work on that analysis to help trim it down and focused on city-owned sites specifically. The analysis is still quite large at just over 300 sites. We also discussed how the largesse of this analysis has created the need for more refined criteria to assist in identifying a site. And if you remember, I presented this a couple weeks ago. And these criteria presented are related to population and site characteristics. And some of the questions included, should efforts focus on families or individuals, or a mix of both? Upon that decision, how many? And that would determine the size of the appropriate site. What resources should be devoted to such a project? Should we focus on piloting a new program or use existing services to address these needs? The meeting ended with no clear consensus on how to approach the issue. We also discussed how we've worked to identify process issues for potential sites. While regulatory processes are site-specific, it is safe to assume that the large majority of sites do have significant regulatory issues related to their use or intended use. And furthermore, in addition to these regulatory processes, it is advised that public processes to address neighborhood concerns and any potential new developments be researched and what is germane and best for the concerned neighbors related to any new development. The impact of these considerations, reaching agreement on a population and site characteristics, regulatory processes, and neighborhood processes is to lengthen the timeline of any action related to identifying and putting to use any potential site or sites for the upcoming winter season. Because of this, staff is looking to forward a proposed work program that front-loads some immediate actions and looks to resolve other issues over a longer period of time. This work plan would proceed as follows. We would start with getting a motion from council today to proceed with the car camping amendment process. Develop a series of proposed winter strategies. Develop options to support, improve, and potentially expand existing services. Work on potential new initiatives. And then continue with the remaining task force recommendations. The amendment to the car camping ordinance, which defined tents as vehicles for the purpose of legal car camping, is set to expire at the end of this year. We're looking to, with a council motion, put in process the public hearing and all the requirements we have to do to extend this program. Second, staff would return on October 31st upon meeting with service providers to discuss needs and strategies for the coming winter, along with cost estimates of any strategies. Third, we would develop options to support, improve, and potentially expand existing services. We would examine these options with existing social service networks and providers, and ideally come back to council either at a work session or in another form with a panel to discuss existing services, best practices, long-term strategies, and the costs associated with these, and gaps. The next item would be to work on potential new initiatives, to explore new proposals and/or initiatives to address gaps in existing services in relation to long-term needs and forecasted long-term costs for such a new initiative. And finally, we would work on the remaining 5 items included in the Opportunity Eugene Task Force recommendations. And as we said in July that we would do upon approving a policy framework. So our recommendations have been passed out in motion form. In brief, these would be to approve a policy framework, to direct staff to prepare the car camping tent amendment extension, and to accept the staff work plan. And that's it for me, yeah.
So let's tackle this. You've tabled the policy framework, right? So now we're down to whether you want to direct staff to prepare the car camping tent amendment extension. And could you please, before we do that, explain to me, didn't we, in addition to that, have the issue of not seeing reductions happening in our car camping program as it currently exists? And that seems like a big deal to me. That's like losing ground that we've already taken.
And that would be, we didn't want to talk about money today. We wanted to just, there's 2 separate processes. One would be extending the ordinance, amendment to the ordinance. And the second would be coming back on the 31st and talking about the costs of any interim or winter season strategies. And we would include that and the costs of continuing the extension to the program, the number of sites themselves, on October 31st.
I've got George Pulley and Andrea in the queue. I would just like to say that for me, one of the things we know we've done successfully is the car camping program. It only meets a portion of the need, but it meets and it does help. And so I would hate for us to lose ground on that. And I guess my concern is that we act on it fast enough that we don't see any loss of ground. So whatever that takes to deal with that in a time-appropriate manner, given that the council wants to keep it going, I just want to be sure we don't let time fritter away on that. George Polling.
Well, at our last meeting, I was one that raised the issue of extending the current ordinance to include tents. In fact, I asked, what do we need to do to get that ball rolling? So, I don't know if these motions are going to be put out by the council president or not, but I'm very willing to support that. I do have a question on one of your slides, and it's the one pertaining to the develop options to support, improve, and potentially expand existing services, and convening a panel discussion related to existing services, best practices and long-term strategies. Well, I hope part of that discussion will also include how these existing services look at a self-governed camp or village or utopian state, how that fits in with the way they currently deal with the homeless issue, because my understanding is, that's basically what is being looked at is to be a self-governed. But if we're going to have one of the existing social services, and this relates back to one of George's motions, are we going to have conflicting values here, or are they going to be able to work with a self-governed community, or whatever you want to call it? So I hope that's part of the discussion when that does come up.
Andrea?
So I kind of have the same questions about the motions on number 1. So will this city manager lead us down the path of what we need to do to extend that amendment on the camping ordinance?
Yes. First motion, if you approve that motion, we'll set all that process in place, and so it doesn't expire,
Okay.
well,
So
it will
moved.
be extended then.
Second.
31st.
So did you,
Yes.
you moved it and you seconded it?
Yes.
Okay.
Darn, I wanted to.
Okay, well,
You
go
should
ahead.
have.
It seemed like
Chris?
Oh, I
Oh,
was,
you want to speak to it? Go ahead.
well, I
go ahead.
wasn't, that wasn't really what my comments were, but I was just trying to get it out there. So thank
Pardon
you.
me, can somebody block that light, please? The light
It's
is
still on. You
Take my minutes.
just going to turn it off.
So, Mayor, I just wanted to thank staff for the presentation. I know this is like herding cats, killing snakes, whatever, however you want to call it. I do appreciate a lot of the recommendations that you have put forth to us. I think those are good ones. And I just kind of wanted to ask a question on just a couple. So I forgot, were you the gentleman who was involved in getting the public bathrooms in the Whitaker, or was that?
I've been working on it.
And have we gotten that yet? Have we met Nirvana yet?
We haven't, well, it's always a sticky situation with restrooms, but we have Reality Kitchen has agreed to host them, and I met with them 2 weeks ago because there's been a significant slowdown in what we were negotiating and his not his willingness, but just trying to create the ideal situation for a portable restroom. I've also been working in downtown and getting signage put up, maps to help people who are downtown locate existing restrooms downtown. So we've had progress in that, and signs are going up. Creating a partnership for a restroom in Whitaker has been a little bit more
Okay. Okay, thank you.
difficult. Yeah.
I believe you. So I guess that's all I have there.
Chris?
It may be that this one is acceptable, if I could wait to speak until after we vote on this first motion, because I think it's probably okay with most everybody here, and then I can talk after that.
So as I understand this motion, and we'll vote on it, no more comment about this, this does include the provision that you can use tents, but it is also an extension of the number of campsites that we have been funding.
The motion itself isn't, but what we will come back with is how to do that as well.
Okay, because that is a financial decision, but,
Yes, yes.
right. All right. All those in favor of the motion?
What is the motion?
The first, number one.
Number one on the
Number
city manager recommendation.
Was it moved and seconded?
Yes, it
Yes.
was. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in favor, none in opposition. It passes. All right. So next, Chris.
Thank you. I'm wondering if it is possible for us to not be in an either-or situation. I like the work plan that's being proposed. I like the fact that the city is working very hard on this and has some good processes in place to come up with something that's thoughtful. And I realize there's a lot of concern and passion right now about doing something that's moving the ball down the court. I understand that. And I think that's really at the core of what George is doing in his first motion. Rather than approach this as an either-or, perhaps we can find elements in both that we can continue with. And I always like to have a plan B. And if George, in his first motion, and I'll have him read it again because I don't have a copy of it in front of me, I don't know what it is. If George's motion is to get to the 31st with a recommendation on some sites that we can then, keep the ball moving, I could find myself willing to support that as long as we don't stop doing all this important work that is also going on, that I'm banking on, really providing us a lot of really good information and background. So it may be that we can pursue both at the same time, so I can get what I want and George get what he wants, and we keep moving. So I would ask if you could reread your first motion, the one that's on the table right now, so that I could really understand what you're proposing and see to the degree to which there may be some compatibilities.
Is it on the table?
Is it tabled?
This had been tabled.
It's been tabled, it'd have to come off the table.
You can't just read it again? I'm just asking him to read it.
Okay.
Well, let's see. I seem to be missing a page. Here we go. Well, it's strictly for, both motions are just for information. That's all. It's not council action or anything. It's just information.
Yeah.
Number one, I move to direct the city manager to return on October 31st with a list of potential sites that could be leased to a nonprofit to establish a pilot project for temporary transitional housing shelters for approximately 30 adults and their accompanying children. The list should include city-controlled properties that are 1 acre or larger. The list should A, indicate if there are buildings on site that could be utilized. B, indicate access to public transportation and bike paths. C, indicate whether the site has utilities or not. And D, include properties that are underutilized and not routinely used for community events.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. You're right. At the core, it's essentially coming back with more information, which I'm always in favor of. I would be willing, if that comes off the table, I could be willing to vote in favor of that if there's the expectation that we'll also continue with what to me is a very important process to keep moving in a very thoughtful way to accommodate all these other things. So I don't want this to be an either or. I think we can say, yeah, if what you're wanting is more information by the 31st and that's kind of forcing us to move a little faster, okay. But I'd also at the same time don't want this to say this is the alternative to what I consider to be a very good city process.
So I'll call in just a second, George. As I understand this motion, it's asking for information that would help you make a decision as a council whether or not you wanted to move forward with a particular site. It does not designate a site or a particular model.
Right.
That's my understanding. Or do you want to say?
Yes, I never envisioned that either one of those motions to be to supersede anything else that we would do in this area, but to complicate it and and then we've heard staff at the beginning of the meeting. We heard the manager and staff say they wanted direction, and this is to provide direction for a very specific proposal. That really came, and very scaled down, by the way, that came out of the Opportunity Eugene, the 3 months of meetings that everybody went to. And it doesn't even say, well, let's do this and to the exclusion of everything else. It doesn't even say to do or not do. Because we need more information to see if it's feasible. And then we can, look at other cities' experiences with things like this and get and include all the information to see if we want to go ahead and proceed with it. As far as the work plan goes, it seems like there's certain elements in there, that we started this in the fall, really, with you and I and Councilor Farr and Councilor Ortiz and the staff, and we were talking about how to, get the most out of the human service funding for the agencies, and we came to the conclusion that we simply need more money. So I'm really wondering about the value of kind of going over all that old ground again at that one particular element of the work plan. I think the other ones are fine, but that one I don't know. I'd probably go ahead and support this motion, but I really don't see the value of getting a whole bunch of people together and going over the same ground that we went over last fall. I don't see any value. I think that's a sterile path. unless we can get some more money. It just kind of seemed to boil down to that. So I'm not sure if I'll support this motion totally yet or not. That's all. Thank you.
So I've got Mike in the queue. Alan, did you have your hand up?
I was just going to say we need to pull this off the table
So,
or put it back on the table.
This is your motion, I think, that we're talking about.
Which motion?
Yours, number one.
so is there
Oh.
a motion to put it back on the table?
Is it the motion to put it on the table? No, to pull it off the table. I move to remove off the table George's first motion.
I second it.
Moved and seconded. Okay, so,
It's not debatable, but you do need to vote to take it.
all right, take it off. All right, not debatable, not debatable. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's off the table. I mean, it's been on the table. On the table. Take it.
Off the shelf.
Yeah, off the shelf on the table. Okay, all right.
Off that table on this table.
All right, so now, Mike is next to the queue.
Thank you, Mayor. I again reiterate that this particular decision presupposes that we are going to create a camp. What we're asking is recommendations on where. For me, that's putting the cart before the horse, because we have not allowed the staff to talk with us yet about all of the potential implications of that decision. I'd really like us to make an informed decision about whether to do so before we have a decision about where to do so. I'm just as concerned as anybody else and just as passionate as anyone else about doing what we can to help with folks who find themselves homeless, especially at this time of year. But what I don't want to do is see us create another situation like we had last year. I want us to do it intelligently. So I can't support this motion because of its timeliness. I'm not saying that I'm not in favor of more information about where it might be possible. I'm certainly in favor of all of, as Chris has always said, of us getting more information. But we haven't had a thorough discussion about whether to do it. I appreciate the work done by many good people to take a look at whether or not this is a good idea from their perspective, and they gave us a good recommendation. But that committee of people didn't consist of those experts that might be able to warn us of a potential risk for doing so. So we're not thoroughly examining the risk of this decision before we talk about where. And that's why I'll vote no at this time.
So, Glenn, do you have a copy of the language of his motion? I thank you for that. I didn't hear in that language any agreement to have a camping site. I thought it was an exploratory motion.
I have the motion here, there is no.
That's correct, Mayor. This is, the motion would direct staff to come back with a list of sites and other information related to the list. So it doesn't say there will be a site. It doesn't say there won't be a site. It says come back with a list of sites, possible sites, and information related to those.
This is thank you for that. This does not push it one way or the other. It does try to move us down the line in terms of getting information to help us make that decision. And this is that chicken and egg thing we've been kind of wrestling with from meeting to meeting, which is I don't want to say I want a site until I look at what sites are possible and what's possible to have on a site and investigate it. On the other hand, I don't want to look at the possible sites or investigate it until I make up my mind whether I want to do it or not. So we've had this sort of circular conversation through several meetings, and I think what George is trying to do here is say, I'm just trying to sort of roll out things that I think are necessary for us to have to be able to make that decision, and I think that's what you're being asked to do with this motion. Alan, Pat, George Brown, and then George Polling.
So I very much appreciate what George is trying to do here, which is move the ball along. In your motion, George, the staff mentioned that they have a list that's approximately 300 sites long. I was wondering what your intent was. I don't want to get a list that's 300 long. I think we need something more along the lines of 10 to 20, and your motion doesn't specifically address how many sites to send back to us. So I don't know what how staff would interpret that, if they would take all 300 of them and categorize them based on the criteria in the motion.
According to the motion, staff would need to come back with any site that is city-controlled or owned that is more than 1 acre. I don't know how many of the hundreds of sites are more than 1 acre, but what the motion says is any site more than 1 acre, staff should come back with.
Does it have any other parameters around it?
Utilities.
City,
Well, it just says if it has utilities. It's the only city-owned 1 acre, near bus or bike paths.
well, the motion that was emailed out says list of potential sites that could be leased. The list should include city-controlled properties that are 1 acre or larger, and then the list should indicate if there are buildings on site, indicate access to public transportation and bike paths, indicate whether the site has utilities or not, include properties that are underutilized and not routinely used for community events. So it's 1 acre or more, properties that are underutilized and not routinely used for community events. That's how I interpret the motion, based on what was written.
Did you want to?
Well, I can answer your concern.
Okay.
Well, what we could do is, I have no idea what's on that 300 property list. The only property list I recall seeing in the last year was surplus properties, and there's certainly not 300 of them. The one, it was a page or 2-page list, and there weren't. So I'm wondering if they're including parks, and if they're including all parks. Well, I think you could probably just scratch public parks and scratch anything that doesn't have utilities. That would immediately shrink it down to, I have no idea, I'll guess 50 sites.
Yeah. My next question was, what does utilities mean?
What do utilities mean?
Yeah. Is that
means
electricity, water, and sewer? But not necessarily.
Sewer would be preferable. You could leave sewer out and use, porta potties.
I think you should be specific.
Pardon?
I think you should be specific.
Okay, with or without sewer. It's still going to be a very short, it's going to be a short list. It's not going to be pages and pages.
All right. Alan, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, the second motion that George put forth kind of addresses Mike's concern. I think they were meant to kind of go simultaneously, and that's to look at and you amended it to risks and legal requirements. So I think what I would like to see us do is have those both go forward so that we could have that conversation at the same time, but I'd like to move the ball forward on narrowing the list of potential sites, at the same time talk about the legal requirements and the risks associated with them. If we wait until we have the conversation completely done and then start the process of narrowing the sites, we're going to be way behind the 8 ball. So I think those two things can go in parallel without making a decision. So I would hope that the council would move both of those forward.
Okay, Pat.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, to the motion. I don't believe that the motion implies that we as a council are suggesting that it's a done deal placing a tent camping site inside the city limits. There's a lot, we'd be remiss as a council, we'd be going down the wrong path if we didn't understand and acknowledge that there are a great many people in this community who simply do not want that to happen. However strong any one person around this table may feel, and however strong the people in the audience and the people watching may feel, there are many people in this community that don't want that to happen. We have to continue to listen to them and continue to make certain that they feel that they are being heard throughout this entire process. The motion itself is bringing back information. I don't think it's bringing back enough information, though. I have a problem with the motion in that it says city-controlled properties. Now, as a council, we can only address city-controlled properties, so I understand how this motion would be limited to city-controlled properties. But really, when we're looking for a tent site, limiting it to city-controlled properties is potentially missing the most likely and most acceptable places inside of our community for a temporary campsite. The second is that information that I'd like to include properties that are underutilized would be include conditions that exist that would potentially preclude the site, including risk and including neighborhood concerns. So I think if you are developing this list, City Manager, that it should also say, but if we choose this site, here are the things that potentially could be a problem for locating at this site, and that would include risk, it would include neighborhood concerns, it would include potential sanitation issues, whatever the list may include that are conditions that could potentially rise. So a question for you, City Manager. Does this motion imply to you that any risks or conditions that would preclude a particular site would be listed by you?
No. I would take this as Glenn mentioned before, that we return with a list of all city-owned, as it reads right now, all city-owned sites over an acre that are underutilized. I'm not sure exactly what that means, and so that would be a little bit of a conversation, and not routinely used for community events, and that we could probably figure that part out. So, so I don't, as I read it right now, it doesn't talk about impact to neighborhoods or adjacent properties or schools or those kinds of things.
I'm afraid that by giving you this motion as it stands, we would come back to the meeting on October 31st and have a long, long discussion that would take a lot more than 1.5 hours to get to the bottom of, because we would start talking about risks and we'd start hearing from neighbors who are at any one of the potential sites or surrounding one of the potential sites. They would have to talk and talk and talk through it unless those risks were identified ahead of time and sites where the conditions could not be satisfied were eliminated from that list. So would you need a motion for that to be a part of this? Then I would move to add, after include properties, I'd move to add conditions, include conditions that exist that would potentially preclude the site, including, but not limited to, risk and neighborhood concerns.
Second?
Moved and seconded. I've got George Brown and George Pull in the queue. Do you want to respond to this? George Brown, do you want to?
Yes, I do. That's unacceptable. The neighborhood concern part especially. That, we haven't even what these do is they request for information. I think probably what we need to do is somebody, and maybe I'll do it if no one else does, perhaps we need to have a work session specifically on this idea of the temporary transitional homeless encampment, so we can just talk about that by itself. But before we do that, we need information. And definitely we need to know the neighbors' concerns so that we can address them and hear from them. Of course, I'm not saying we don't. In fact, I think that's essential.
So you're not expecting a decision October 31st then?
We're not making any. No, we just want the information on October 31st of these 2 points, and then of course we just need to know the legal requirements. Of course, any type of thing, if it was ever to happen, would have to have insurance, just like a Dignity Village in Portland is insured. My understanding is it's insured by the same people that do the country fair, but I could be wrong about that. I think I read that. So, they're a reputable insurance company. They insure Dignity Village. Of course they have insurance. I'm not sure about the ones in Seattle. That's a question I didn't ask when I was up there visiting those sites. So, yeah, I can't accept that amendment. I mean, it's a request for information. I think we need another meeting to, an in-depth discussion of the proposal, but we can't do that until we have, more information. So I can't accept any change. I'm willing to change the first motion to knock off city parks. So that will shoot that list way down and include, electric and water. And that will knock it down even more. So I would accept somebody to modify that. That's fine. But I don't think that we need to have these other things added on there for what, the information that we're seeking for 2 weeks from now.
Glenn?
You first need to deal with the current motion to amend, and then you can come back to changing the main motion.
All right. And so I've got George Pulligan and Mike wanting to respond to your motion, Pat and Alan. Okay. And look at the time, because if you want to get something done, we got to get it done.
Well, this actually is one of the points that I was going to speaking to the main motion, but it just so happens it covers this. I'm willing to support Pat's amendment. I think it's incumbent upon the city to involve the immediate neighbors at the very onset. I mean, look at the backlash that we caught over the fact that people started filling out the 13th and Chambers site as a possible site. And I said at one of our council meetings that based on the input that I had at that time, that I wouldn't have been able to support that because of the neighborhood concerns and opposition to it. So when we start throwing out a list, and a good example is what happened with the EMX system. As soon as you start throwing out something defined, whether it be a list or a route or whatever, without thorough information going out to everybody that involved, it's going to be in the back of their minds assumed that it's going to be here. And we got to get in front of that and avoid that. And by coming back with this list without involving the immediate neighbors on the onset, I think is a big mistake. And we'll end up at this table again trying to figure out, what we're going to discuss. And the other comments I had, I guess we'll be back to the main motion, but one thing that George brought up was costs, the insurance, the water, the electric. I think part of the information we need also is who's paying for it. We can't, the city can't afford to keep paying for stuff. So where's the money going to come to cover the water, the electric, the sewer, the garbage, the insurance? And if a social service agency takes it over or community volunteers say, we've got funding source, what happens if that funding source, wherever it comes from, dries up? Are we, the city, going to get stuck with the bill from that point on? So that's another discussion that we have to have that I think is very important to the whole conversation.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. We, as a council, were ready to, we did, frankly, amend our building code for the sake of what some neighbors did not want to live next to. We had the minor code amendment process, and it changed because folks, rightly, didn't want buildings that were quite that tall built next to their single-story houses. And that's us being understanding of the livability of folks, and I think this is a significant issue. We've seen it in the emails. So it is a consideration we should take. I'll support the motion because of it. But there's a piece of it that's not quite there in your amendment, and it's the risk issues associated. Now, I get that it's a part of the second motion, and I'll support that. But we're really, again, we're putting the cart in front of the horse here, as George has even said himself. We should be talking about the overarching policy question first about whether we should be doing this, and if so, under what kind of principled framework. That's how we should be making this decision, in my opinion.
Alan?
So the second motion that was amended by Mike actually says explanation of the legal requirements and the risks. I was thinking that what you wanted, Pat, was that you wanted kind of a list of what the potential objections would be, or, and if that's so, then maybe adding it into the second motion makes more sense.
Beyond objections, conditions. Objections, anybody can raise an objection, but if there's a condition that's a real thing that exists that could preclude the citing.
Like what?
Like immediate neighborhood uproar, for instance. That would be a real serious condition. For instance.
Do you want that attached to each site?
Transportation could be a serious condition. Location generally with adjacent to services could be a serious condition. There are a number of conditions that could exist that are greater than simply objections. An objection would be, well, I can't tell you why, but I don't like it.
Yeah, right.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? What would be easy to produce in the next 2 weeks for you? Because we've done a lot of work on this already. is a list of the sites that kind of meet this criteria. If you want to take parks out, we can easily tell you what the zoning issues are going to be, the regulatory type issues on those sites. It would be hard to predict the serious neighborhood uproar unless we, quickly send out an email to all the neighbors of all those 20 sites and they let us know there's going to be an uproar. I think what would be maybe more helpful would be if we can provide you with kind of the level of public engagement we would recommend. If it's 20 sites, it would be easy enough to say, hey, it's in a neighborhood, here's what you might want to do, here's what we would typically do if we were improving a park in a neighborhood and the kind of process we would go through.
What could
as opposed
possibly
to
satisfy
trying
that?
to predict that there's going to be an uproar.
What may be easy for you to do that could satisfy that for me would be just list the number of residences or the number of households within a certain perimeter of the suggested site. Say within 200 meters of the suggested site.
I think we're back with Alan, right?
What I was going to say, and thanks for saying that, Sarah, is if I were staff, I wouldn't know what to do with your request to add neighborhood. Maybe the number of residences is, I don't know how easy or hard that.
Say within a certain distance. So, for example, if it's publicly owned land and it's within 200 feet of a residential neighborhood, there's a process we have to go through, a regulatory public process we have to go through. And so we have that information already compiled of how close. So
That would satisfy that.
Alan, are you?
Right. But if that's the clarification, then I think that's acceptable as one of the filters. But I also think that is a good add to the second motion, which is to have staff kind of give us a discussion about potential neighborhood considerations.
Chris?
Thank you. Appreciate the discussion. We're trying to zero in. I appreciate George's willingness to make his own self-friendly amendment to narrow the list down, because I'm concerned it could be quite a large list. I appreciate that.
Self-friendly motion.
Self-friendly, yeah. He's friendly to himself. That's a good thing. And I can still support that motion because at its core it's still information. That's really what it is. We're not making a decision. We're just getting more information. But I'm concerned that if that's the only piece of information we get on the 31st, I don't know how really helpful that will be, because there will still be a huge amount of conversation that will still need to occur, which is why I'm willing to support that motion, particularly with the amendment. And the second one also, because I do think that is also an important one with it. But I also would propose that we also pass the city manager's recommendation number 2 as a parallel part of it. We might need to do a little tweak in recognition of what we've done. But I still want this to keep going forward, because I still think there's a lot of really important work going on in number 2 that we don't need to just kind of stop. We need to keep doing that as well. And the degree to which we can make those compatible, hopefully we can make them compatible so you're not having to do twice as much work, I think would be a good thing. But I'm willing to support George's motion with the expectation that we'll continue the rest of this, what I will think will really be the most important, valuable work for me.
Let's see if we can get this done. We've got 15 minutes here. So all those in favor of Pat's motion?
As clarified?
Yeah, as clarified.
Clarified? Do we know what that is? Put
How
your
many?
hand up for a second. Do we know what that is, clarified?
It's how many people within 200 feet?
I think we'll bring back a
residents,
list of
sorry.
properties and how close they are to.
And the other issues that
We have language? that you-
The other part of what I heard Pat say was conditions that would potentially preclude use of the site.
yes.
Is that part
So
of
it's
it?
that coupled with what Sarah just said in terms of number of properties within a certain distance.
And what would staff do with that
Inform us.
second part? I mean, what would that mean?
A condition that would potentially preclude use of the site, slopes of 82%.
Environmental.
I mean, something that...
Physical.
Right.
Physical.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Move us as fast as I can here. So I think we're ready to vote on this. It's clear enough for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All those in favor of Pat's motion? 1, 2, 3, 4.
I need clarification still.
Up. All right, Betty.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I still don't know if we're saying if there could be neighborhood objections. And I don't think we could possibly know that until we have a site.
No, that won't be a part of it.
That is not part of it.
You've taken that out.
I will respond to that, just very simply, Mayor, that we've experienced situations where people not knowing the full information have generated a great deal of opposition. If anybody in this room wants this motion to pass, if anybody in this room wants us to provide a camping site for a limited number of families for the winter, we need to get as much information out front as possible so that we don't have a large army of people coming out and against it with the information they don't necessarily have.
But Pat, my understanding is that your motion does not include that. What you were talking, go ahead, John.
Well, I just want to clarify what I heard Pat say is this motion represents sites for tent camping for the winter. This motion doesn't have anything to do with the winter.
No.
So I just want to clarify that.
This motion doesn't, however, that I'm hoping to avert something like what happened with MX on West 11th, where people had a bunch of misinformation and generated a great deal of opposition.
I just want to be sure people know what they're voting for here. So before, okay, Glenn.
So, Mayor, here's what, based on the conversation, here's what I understand Pat's amendment to be, and Pat, you can tell me if I got it wrong. It would be adding to George's motion language that would say the information coming back would also include conditions that would potentially preclude use of the site, as well as information about, and Sarah, how did you phrase that, the number of residential properties within a certain...
Yeah, I think what I was saying is that we could easily say how the proximity to neighborhoods. I don't know if we can do an exact count on, but we'll provide you as much information as possible so you can understand what the possible...
So is that the intent of your amendment?
All right, so now, ready to vote. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in favor. In opposition, 1. It passes. Okay, so now you're back to the...
You're back to the main motion.
Yes.
So if George wanted to do his friendly amendment related to just limiting it to parks, now would be a time to do that if it's okay with the, I think, Andrea, you were the person who seconded.
I will be okay with whatever the maker of the motion suggests. Okay,
I'll
sir.
speak to that just briefly. Yeah, I've moved to amend removing reference to parks.
Okay, you don't have to move to amend.
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with that, and Andrea's okay with that. That's a friendly amendment, and so the list will not include parks.
That's right, friendly to
A
yourself.
friendly to yourself amendment.
All right. We know where the parks are. We know.
Okay, anything else,
They don't need to be
George?
on the list.
Anything else?
No.
Okay, so you're back to George's motion, Sons Parks. Okay, so all those, go, George, pulling.
Real quickly, again, just want to repeat that, make it explicitly clear that we are not voting to move forward with a site. It's just bringing the information back. I do have a question about limiting it to, and I understand why we're trying to limit it to city-controlled properties, but what if we have an organization that has some property out there that's willing to say, hey, use our parking lot, or, you can use the property owned across town, whether it be an organization or a private individual, or maybe the county, or a partnership between the schools, the county, the city. Are we going to make an exception if someone steps forward, or are we just going to limit it to this?
That would be what I build into my motion.
So this is the question I'm throwing out. I'm willing to support this, to move it forward, to get that additional information.
Mike?
I'm sorry, I was saying, Mayor, excuse me, I have a family thing I have to go deal with. I'm a no vote, if I can say that and walk out of the room.
Hold on, we're going to vote right now.
Vote right now.
Okay, all those in favor of George's motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In opposition,
They only know vote.
passes.
Sorry, I have to leave.
All right, next, we have one more motion, I believe.
To take his off the table.
I'll do that.
Oh, the other one has to come off the table.
Yes.
Should I do that?
Yes.
Okay.
I move to take off the table George's second motion as amended by Mike.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
And
Yes.
I would like,
Not debatable.
Not
First, you
debatable.
have to vote on.
and I'd like to talk.
All right, please, all those in favor of taking it off the table? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It passes. It's back on the table. Okay, now,
So right now it says legal requirements and risk, and I'd like to add what Pat was talking about, which is to have staff have a conversation about potential neighborhood objection considerations in that conversation. If you'd accept that as a friendly.
No, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'm pretty much aware of just about every objection the neighbors could have. We've been over that in some detail with the neighbors around 13th and Chambers. That will come later. We definitely need to hear from them, but I think this is way premature to have staff get involved. They've got enough on their table for the meeting 2 weeks from now, with providing their, their recommendations that we're going to approve, and then these two motions that we're voting on. They've got a full plate. They don't need to be going around and talking to all the neighborhoods. And I totally agree the neighbors need to be involved. But we can't get neighborhoods involved with a list of properties that we haven't even seen yet. And so that's why I objected to that being added to the motion. That conversation will happen, and it needs to happen. But for the purposes of this motion, I just don't think it needs to be in there, and I don't think staff needs to be contacting all the neighborhood leaders and going to neighborhood meetings between now and then and compiling a list of objections. I can write you out a list of objections after this meeting, as well as answers to them. So I'm sorry. I understand the intent. Totally.
I'll accept that.
But I just
we'll have time for that.
Yes, we will definitely, and we will make time. Yeah.
All right, all those in favor of George's motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, none in opposition, it passes. Now there's another motion? Yes.
I would like to move that we direct the city manager to return to council, and we can maybe talk about the date if the 31st is no longer feasible. If you still think the 31st is feasible, we can leave that.
I guess for us on the winter strategies, yes. I'll have some, perhaps, clarification or comments on the rest of the motion, depending on what your motion on the order that some of the stuff gets.
Okay. And you can advise. I'll read what I'm wanting to, and then you can tell me whether that works. I move to direct the city manager to return to council on October 31st for a work session on proposed winter strategies, and following council's action on those strategies, to schedule subsequent work sessions to address the following topics on the following order: options to support, improve, and potentially expand existing services. B, potential new initiatives, including a possible village on both city and private sites. And C, work on the remaining 5 items included in the Opportunity Eugene Task Force.
I'll second that.
So the issue with that, moved and seconded, the issue with that, Chris, is, so by doing that, are you asking them to go out and look for other sites other than the ones they've been asked to look for that are on city property?
I don't necessarily want them to pursue an active effort to do it, but if they should be aware of, or if they should come into their understanding those additional sites, I want them to be included.
So I want the wording to be adequate to capture that, because I don't want them to get another big, you reduce the list and now you're going to...
Yeah, I don't want to go back out and create another 300, but if you are aware, through the work you've done...
Known private sites?
Known private sites. Okay, something like that would be fine.
Yes, John.
Is that helpful?
In the context of the motion with George Brown, or is this...
This is
we'll
this
provide
motion.
this. Well, so if between now and the 31st, there's some potential site that's not city-owned, do we bring that back or not because somebody said they'd like to include it?
Yes.
We bring that back, okay. And then I just want to make very clear that the order of this really isn't quite this. So we're working on the sites. We'll kind of exhaust whatever conversation happens then we'll come back to expand existing services. So I just want to make sure there's no expectations that we'll be working on expanding existing services now until we sort of work through the winter for sure, and this motions that we passed a couple minutes ago.
Then I
just want to make sure there's not an expectation that we're going to be working on expanding services as the next item coming out. We're really working on the potential new initiative.
Okay, then if with the second's approval, I would strike in the following order from the motion.
That's fine.
Is that okay? All right.
That's fine. I just want to make sure.
Okay, Alan.
So the first part of this motion says return to council on a work session on proposed winter strategies, and following the council's action on those strategies to then do those other things, right? So what we'll get back on the 31st is winter strategies. The rest of it comes later.
Victor Strategies and George's motion.
And George's motion also.
Okay, ready to vote on this?
Right, sorry.
One quick item. I would sooner it included all public land instead of just city, but I understand that there are certain conditions that would surround that. Take a lot more work on your part. I wish it would have E-Web land. I wish it would have 4J Bethel School District land. So
We could talk about it on the 32nd.
we can talk about that
If anybody
later.
wants to run up and offer some, I'm sure we'd be happy to take it. All right.
And it's a pilot.
Okay. All those in favor, please indicate. 7 in favor and none in opposition. It passes. So, have we gotten through everything that we need
Number
to?
3 still tabled?
Number 3 is
Number 3 is still on the table.
The managers.
3 is on. Anybody want to take 3 off the table? Nope.
I move to take it off the table.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Nope. It appears to be destined to stay on the table a little bit longer. Okay. You got 2 seconds. I will share this with you before we. So the reason I was late is because they were having a birthday celebration at Skinner's Cabin, and the wonderful Lutheran ladies of Emus Lutheran Church made the city a quilt,
Pat, you might want to have this.
Oh, you need a hand?
and it is a
Oh, wow.
Wow.
pretty extraordinary thing.
Holy cow.
And I just wanted to
Whoa.
share it with you.
Wow, that's beautiful.
How cool is that?
Lots of pictures from the history of the community. You'll notice Autzen over here. There's little running paths over here. Slug Queens down here. All kinds of, that's a wonderful contribution to our community. Since we currently don't have a city hall, we might be wanting to look at the library to see if we can have this display for our birthday. So that's what I'll do now, but I just wanted to express a big, 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 big thank you to our community and especially the women